you are going to feel like you just walked into an old-fashioned store in Vermont that is just profusely smelling of apple, cinnamon, Gramma vibes. There are certain things I do not like about an apple crisp. When the filling is thin or watery and the top is dry and sandy. So this gluten-free recipe is not that. It has a thick and juicy filling. The top is big, buttery clumps. It is perfection, and I'm gonna show you how to make it. Okay, so let's start with the filling. It has a lot of apples, a ton of apples. You're gonna question the amount of apples, but once it bakes, you're gonna be like, she was right. Before we do all the apples, we're gonna make the sauce for it. So it is 1/3 cup of granulated sugar, 2 tablespoons of light brown sugar. Now this is our thickening. I do 1.5 tablespoons of cornstarch, 1/8 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then for our liquid ingredients, we're just gonna do 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, 1 tablespoon of water, and then 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Just gonna stir all that up, and then we're ready to put the apples in. This also needs to be put in a large bowl because we're using a lot of apples, so you wanna make sure your bowl is big enough to hold all that goodness. All right, so you will need 6 large apples, and I use Golden Delicious apples, but Honeycrisp works well. Anything that holds its shape while it's baking. So like Red Delicious, don't do that. What you're gonna do is you're gonna grate one of the apples. And I do my grated apples first because what happens is I start chopping my apples and then I'm like, oh crap, I chopped all the apples. I forgot to grate one. You're just gonna peel your apples, cut the core out, and then grate one. So when you're grating, use the large opening on your box grater. You could also do this in your food processor, but then you gotta wash a food processor. For one apple, it doesn't take long. So if you are wondering what the actual size of a large apple is, you need 2 3/4 pounds of apples for your filling, and then you need 1 extra one for the grated one. Okay, when you're chopping your apples, sliced apples are for apple pie, chopped apples, apple crisp. I like to slice them first and then chop them in about 1/2 inch pieces. This is just all about the baking time. You don't want them too small because they'll break down too much as it bakes, and you don't want it too big because they won't get tender. So shoot for about 1/2 inch. All right, this is what I mean about needing a large bowl. So I'm gonna try to stir this up. You'll also notice that when I made the filling, I forgot to mention, it only had 1/3 cup of sugar in it, which isn't a lot, but if people have some opinions about sugar, and boy do I hear about them, this is so sweet, there is too much sugar. You know what, you do you. You can put as much sugar, up it or decrease the amount of sugar. There is a lot more sugar in the topping, so that's why I don't put a lot in the filling, because you know, apples are naturally sweet as well, especially if you use a Golden Delicious apple. If you use something like a Granny Smith, it's a little more tart, so I would definitely keep the sugar amount the same or even up it slightly. For your baking pan, you just need a 2-quart baking dish. You could do an 8x8, you could do a 9x9, an 11x7 works as well. It says to grease the baking pan, so you could use anything you prefer, but I like adding butter because what's wrong with butter? It adds a little bit flavor throughout, and just make sure nothing sticks to the pan. Once the apples are in the pan, I'm gonna fill up the pan, but when they bake, they'll break down. I pour 2 tablespoons of melted butter over the top. And the reason I do that is I just feel like it just needs a little bit depth of flavor. Otherwise, you just have the sugars going on and the cinnamon. It just gives a little bit of richness to the apple crisp. Then this is the other unconventional thing. At this point, I cover it with foil, and I'm going to bake it in a 400-degree oven for 20 minutes. This just starts pre-baking the apples while we're making the topping, because the crisp and the apples do not bake at the same rate. The crisp is gonna take a lot shorter time than you need for the apples to break down and get nice and juicy. So I just start that process before. And that is also where the grated apple comes in. The grated apple breaks down quicker than the chopped apples, which just helps thicken that sauce. Because like I said, no thin or watery sauces here. So we have the cornstarch, we have the grated apple, which helps break down and thicken that sauce as it bakes. I like making the crisp topping in the food processor for two reasons. First of all, it makes it go super fast, which always looking for that. And second, it makes the topping like clump up better. If you don't have a food processor though, I do have a by hand method on the recipe if you go to the website. 3/4 cup of gluten-free oats, 1/3 cup of gluten-free flour. Now some crisps don't use flour. I like using flour because that also clumps up the topping so you don't get those dry and sandy layer on top. 1/3 cup of brown sugar. Also, use as much sugar as you want. 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, 2 teaspoons of water. Okay, and then we're just gonna pulse this a few times just to combine. Now to this, then we're going to add the butter. 1/2 cup of butter, which is a stick that's softened. And then you use total for the recipe 1/3 cup of nuts, but I'm just gonna put about 1/2 of them in right now and combine all that up until it kind of gets into like a large clumpy ball. Okay, so the mixture right now is a little wet. So this is when we add the rest of the nuts and then another 1/3 cup of oats. Once that's in there, I'm just going to pulse it a few times to combine everything. And then that's what your crumb topping should look like. And then that's it. It only took a couple minutes to come together. When the apples come out of the oven after they partially bake, it's not going to look at all ready yet, but that's exactly how you want it. So now's when we put our crumb topping on. It's going to be soft. That's fine, you want it like that. So I just take scoops of it and just kind of drop the clumps all around. All that buttery, oaty goodness on top. It's gonna be so warm and comforting and you're gonna be so excited to eat it. Turn your oven down to 350 and then we're gonna put this back into the oven for 40 minutes. It will start to get bubbly around the edges, especially if you're in a glass dish, you could see it start to get bubbly. The filling will not look thick when it's done, but that's fine. It will thicken as it sets. So you're gonna wanna plan ahead for this recipe, especially if you're gonna serve it that day. When it comes out of the oven, the filling will look a little watery, but I promise as it cools, it will thicken and set. So you wanna give it at least, I say 30 minutes, but actually do at least an hour to let it cool before you serve it. It'll still be plenty warm enough to serve it with ice cream and have the nice melty ice cream effect. If you go to the recipe, I also include how to do this in a freezer version. So you just partially bake the apples first, put the topping on, and then you could freeze that and then bake from frozen. It's a great make ahead dessert. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.